We have almost 5,000 teachers, more than twice what we had in 1990. We have close to 550 schools, more than twice what we had in 1990. And yes, we are spending far more on education, a whopping $189 million, almost 5 times what we were spending back in 1990. Yet the increased spending, Mr. Speaker, has not been proportionately matched by increased outputs and outcomes. Many of those enrolled in our schools will repeat or drop out before graduating. Many of our children are still not achieving satisfactory levels of performance. There remains chronic shortages of trained and qualified teachers at all levels of the system. Rising costs and inadequate planning and management remain significant challenges. Mr. Speaker, the situation is true of our education system in general, but very, very true of our secondary education system. Analysis shows that as a proportion of our economy, we are spending far more on secondary education, but without corresponding results. Enrollment rates remain low. 3 out of every 5 high school age children are not in high school. 2 out of every 5 Belizeans overall complete high school. Trained teacher levels at this level are low, and repetition and dropout rates are very high. But beyond the facts of high and growing spending but low results, our spending is inequitable. This means that some students are getting a greater share of public taxpayers' dollars than other students. And what is more significant is that those in poverty or with special academic need often get less of a share of public tax dollars. Furthermore, the poorest families are spending 4 times as much as proportion of their household expenditures on secondary education than the wealthiest families. Compare 32 cents out of every dollar of expenditure for the poorest families with just 8 cents out of every dollar for the wealthiest, even though the wealthiest actually spend more in actual dollar amounts. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the new method of financing we will be implementing is more than about efficiency and getting more bang for our buck. Yes, that is critical. But it is also critical not for its own sake, but because education is critical to our development for many different rationales. Firstly, education is a key factor in economic growth and development. Secondly, education contributes to improve living conditions and reduce criminality and other pathologies. Thirdly, education is linked to key human development indices. Fourthly, ensuring the greatest good for the greatest number of its citizens is the hallmark of good governance. This applies in the education sector as well. And fifthly, education is a basic human right, and social justice demands that we provide for the least among us. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that education is a basic right supported by international conventions. That primary education is not enough to overcome poverty and productivity barriers. That development is significantly undermined when education is low. And that higher poverty and inequality is related with higher social pathologies, criminality, drug abuse, violence. And if anyone has any doubt about this, just watch the news and speak to those who have lost loved ones due to crime and violence. Mr. Speaker, it is for these socio-economic, human rights, good governance, and social justice reasons that we implement in the Ministry of Education a new method of financing for our secondary schools. I could go on to give you all the statistics to show you that we are spending a lot but not getting results, to show that our system is inefficient, to show that enrollment is low and repetition and dropout are high, to show that the financing of secondary education is inequitable, to show that the cost of education is more burdensome on the poorest. Instead, I wish to direct you, if you have not already gone there, to our website where you can find information on the reform, including frequently asked questions, a 3-part presentation on the reform, and some public service announcements. I suspect, Mr. Speaker, that even without the statistics, though, that your own casual observation will lead you to conclude that we have not been doing well for a very, very long time. Far too long, Mr. Speaker, have we been talking about what needs to be done differently. From as far back as 1997 or before, we have prepared proposals and plans to address these issues in our system. We have records of such proposals and plans. In fact, even in 2004, the Belize Association of Principals of Secondary Schools, also known as BAPS, put forward its own proposal to make secondary education spending more fair and effective. The new method of financing is in keeping with these same principles. Mr. Speaker, it is said that only insane people, only crazy people continue to do the same thing and expect different results. It is clearly time for us to do things differently. It is long overdue. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, please allow me to briefly compare the current method of financing with the new method of financing and the benefits to be derived under the new method. Currently, we have two different methods for financing secondary schools. For government schools, we finance 100% of teachers' salaries. For grant-aided schools, we finance 70% of teacher salaries, but we also finance whatever tuition they are charging their students. All schools charge user fees, and there is tremendous variation in the structure and cost of fees. Ask any parents out there about this, Mr. Speaker. Some high school fees are enough to deprive some parents of being able to put food on the table. Imagine if a household has to spend 32 cents out of every dollar on education. It is no wonder why some may choose not to send their children to school. Under the new financing method, Mr. Speaker, secondary schools will be financed on a per-student basis. This means that each school will receive an equivalent amount of funding for each student that they enroll, and all students will receive an equivalent amount of funding no matter the school in which they are enrolled. But in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, the new method of financing will include additional grants to schools for students they enroll who have special academic and or socio-economic need. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the new method of financing will make provision for an additional grant to schools, a performance bonus that will be linked to the school's performance on key performance indicators that are yet to be agreed upon. Mr. Speaker, the new method of financing will therefore provide key incentives to schools. It will provide incentives to be more efficient, to reduce unnecessary expenditure, to reduce repetition and dropout, thus ensuring that more of our young people get an education, thus ensuring that we get the results for the monies we are spending. It will provide incentives for schools to enroll more students, thus contributing to the increased enrollment. It will provide incentives for schools to enroll and provide adequate support services for students with special academic and or socioeconomic need, thus ensuring that more of our students have a chance at completing a secondary education. And it will provide incentives for schools to improve performance, thus improving quality and effectiveness. I wish to caution, Mr. Speaker, in the words of my colleague, the Attorney General, that this is not instant coffee. These changes and all of these anticipated benefits will not happen overnight. First, Mr. Speaker, the implementation of the new method of financing will be phased over a 5-year period to mitigate any shocks to the system and to allow a transition period and process for us to make adjustments and refinements as we go along. That is the beauty of this reform, Mr. Speaker. It allows us to make adjustments as we go along over the years while being faithful to the principles and objectives underlying the reform. Second, Mr. Speaker, the reform of secondary school financing, while it will incentivize schools to rethink current policies and practices, the full effect of such rethinking and revamping of policies and practices will not be felt immediately. It will take time and it will require monitoring of schools, both by the schools themselves and by our Ministry of Education and Youth. Finally, Mr. Speaker, there are other factors and reforms that must play a key role. Significantly, we all need to adopt a mindset that all children can learn and deserve an education rather than to be weeded out. In our beautiful Belizean garden, we do have some who are late bloomers. Certainly, we must address curriculum reform at the secondary level. And through the Task Force on Secondary Education, Finance, and Curriculum Reform, we will collaborate with our schools on achieving such reform. Through the task force, we will also engage schools in a discussion on reducing fees and coming up with a common fee structure, a benefit to our parents and our students. Additionally, we must also address the issue of teacher training for our secondary school teachers. I am very pleased to say that very shortly we will be commencing a teacher training program for secondary school teachers in the Banana Belt with the help of the European Union. We expect to shortly thereafter provide similar opportunities for our secondary school teachers countrywide as we have done with the primary school level. Mr. Speaker, we also need to ensure that our system recruits, retains, and holds in high regard trained teachers of high caliber. In this regard, in the upcoming weeks, I hope I can count on the support of all Belizeans as we welcome into being the Belize Teaching Service Commission, an institution that will protect teachers from arbitrary action by employers while making both teachers and management accountable to the people for their stewardship of our nation's future, our children and young people. Let me speak briefly to the issue of the secondary curriculum reform. We believe that equity is not just about financing, but also about the curriculum to which our children have access. We therefore believe that our children should have access to standard curriculum, comprising a core with electives, including but not limited to vocational and technical options. We do not believe that some students are to be selected for one type of curriculum and others relegated to another type of curriculum because of perceived academic inabilities. Furthermore, we also believe that greater efficiency and effectiveness can be realized by some schools specializing to become magnet schools. A magnet school is a school with specialized courses or curriculum. Students from other schools may take a core curriculum at their main school but take specialist courses at the magnet schools, the way Wesley students and St. Vernon students are taking courses at the Belize City IT Vet as we speak. In this way, we begin to make the best use of our physical and human resources.